but there may have been individual agencies that could have dealt with a piece of it. There were individual sites that could have been dealt with through specific tools. There were potentially individual threats that could have been dealt with by one agency or actor or another. But if you look at the totality of it all, that's what lies behind this advice.
Hey everyone, William Diaz here with Rebel News once again here in Ottawa. Today we'll take a look at what went on during the 26th day of the Emergencies Act inquiry, which took place on November 18, 2022. There's only 1 week left until the inquiry is over. Yeah, the inquiry, let's remember, is taking place because back in February, Justin Trudeau used a never-seen-before anti-terrorism law called the Emergencies Act on peaceful protesters who were part of the Freedom Convoy here in Ottawa, a movement that protested government overreach and the federal COVID-19 mandates. Now, on November 18, we heard from 4 witnesses in total. We heard from Deputy Secretary of Emergency Preparedness and COVID-19 Recovery, Jacqueline Bogdan, Jeff Hutchison, Senior Advisor of Emergency Preparedness, Jacine Charette, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and Nathalie Drouin, the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice. Now, Bogdan and Hutchison both testified together on the first panel of the day, while Charette testified alongside Drouin later on in the afternoon. Let's first take a look at the opening testimony of the day.
Obviously, PCO plays, as it does in many different situations, helps to coordinate the federal government response to any given situation. And the same would be true in this case. So what we're trying to do in coordinating that response, we'll convene departments and agencies together. We're trying to develop a common understanding, a common kind of up-to-date understanding of the situation and assess that situation. We're determining, what are the actions that the federal government needs to take in response to the situation or might need to take.
Alan Honor from the Democracy Fund was the first lawyer to cross-examine the 2 witnesses, and he was then followed by Brendan Miller, counsel for Freedom Corp, the organization that represents key leaders of the Freedom Convoy. Both pressed the witnesses very well on different topics, and the witnesses did not appear super keen to answer every question they were asked. Take a look.
The situation in BC, and was that the situation with the truck, which apparently broke through the blockades?
Yeah, it was a military style. That's my recollection. It was a military style vehicle that had tried to break through the blockade.
And I believe that made it into the Section 58 explanation that there was a military style vehicle that broke through the blockades.
That may be, you could verify that.
And you are aware that by military style vehicle, they meant a vehicle that was painted in camouflage?
Yeah, that may be.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Can you agree in this circumstance, you're aware that the Emergencies Act requires for its invocation for there to be a finding that there to be a threat to the security of Canada?
I'm aware of that, yes.
Okay. And can you agree with me that a threat to the security of Canada in the Emergencies Act, from your understanding, has the same meaning as it does in Section 2 of the CSIS Act?
I'm going to decline to answer this question. I'm sorry. I don't feel that in my current responsibilities and my knowledge and understanding that I can answer that question for you.
The Council for the Government of Saskatchewan then cross-examined the witnesses as well, and it was fairly interesting. We learned during his cross-examination that the government allegedly only began discussing the use of the Emergencies Act a few days prior to its invocation on February 9th.
Okay, so when would the Privy Council office have started to do its homework on the Emergencies Act? When would you or somebody in your office have first started to look at it as a potential option?
It would have probably been on or around the 9th.
Okay, so it would have been only a day before the first meeting of the incident response group when it was being discussed there.
Yep, I think
and
that's right.
No work was done on the Emergencies Act before that.
So I can't say that definitively. work would have been being done by a lot of different people on an anticipatory basis making sure, as I said, that we've done our homework and we would be in a position to answer questions, right? Like if the government turned to the public servants and said, what's involved with invocation of the act? You need to be able to answer all kinds of first order questions, right? Everything from the threshold that's to be met to what's the parliamentary process, what kinds of considerations do you want to be thinking about? So I can't say definitively who was working on what. I wasn't directing that work. So I'm not being evasive. I'm just trying to understand it was all hands on deck at that point, and I can't speak to every part of the public service.
Following their testimonies, Nathalie Drouin and Janice Charette took the stand and began testifying. Take a look at what they had to say.
This was all happening in Ottawa, a lot of it on Wellington Street. If you were looking at the coverage in the media, you were seeing the Parliament buildings behind it. So there was a lot of questions being asked of federal ministers. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And so certainly we had the sense coming out of the meeting on the 8th, they were impatient to know what they could do. And that was my direction to the town at this meeting.
We owned it publicly, but we didn't have jurisdiction to address the situation. So asking ourselves, what can we do to have jurisdiction and really to support? On top of, supporting municipalities, supporting provinces, but that was also the type of questions we were asking ourselves.
These two witnesses were also some of the only ones through the whole inquiry that actually said the Freedom Convoy was a national security emergency. It was urgent, it was critical, she said. Take a look.
The view that I came to was that whether there were still authorities that had not been fully used, that the situation overall was a national emergency. It was urgent, it was critical. There was the threat of serious violence that put at risk the lives, the health and safety, the security of Canadians, our economic fortunes, and that taken together, that was beyond the capacity of any individual province or territory to deal with. We were seeing this on a national scale, breakouts or incidents from coast to coast to coast, including cross-border traffic, even between, I think it was Alberta and one of the territories. This was a situation which had been escalating. I think we were on day 18 of what was happening in Ottawa. This was a scale, this was an escalation, this was a series of volatility. It didn't seem that there was any province or territory that had the power to deal with this uniquely on their own. But there may have been individual agencies that could have dealt with a piece of it. There were individual sites that could have been dealt with through specific tools. There were potentially individual threats that could have been dealt with by one agency or actor or another. But if you look at the totality of it all, that's what lies behind this advice.
Finally, another interesting moment from their testimony arose during a tense exchange between the Council for the Canadian Constitution Federation while he was cross-examining the witnesses.
Monsieur Vigneault learned that the Emergencies Act referenced the threat definition set out in Section 2 of the CSIS Act once the federal government began to seriously consider invoking the EA between February 10th and 13th. He requested that the service prepare a threat assessment on the risks associated with the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He felt an obligation to clearly convey the service's position that there did not exist a threat to the security of Canada as defined in the service's legal mandate. And then further on, in the bottom paragraph, the paragraph that begins, Monsieur Vigneault discussed, he said he discussed this threat assessment at the IRG on February 13th. And then he says the document was also available for distribution for the cabinet meeting, but he does not know if it was distributed by the PCO. So can you please answer, was this threat assessment distributed to the cabinet, yes or no?
I believe I've said earlier that it was.
It was.
After they ended, we invited Keith Wilson, a lawyer for the Freedom Corp, to join us on our live stream to help analyze the events of the day. Wilson spoke with our editor-in-chief, Sheila Gunn-Reid. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I think what we saw today was a breakdown in the rule of law. And what do I mean by that? Like, we hear that expression a lot, and it has many meanings, but its most simplest meaning is what it's contrasted with, is that we used to have in the 1400s and the 1500s and up until the Magna Carta, we used to have rule by man. The king's whims became the law, and the laws changed with the whims of the king. And we were supposed to replace that with the rule of law, which means government, the king, the prime minister, can only do that which the law allows him to do. And what we heard today was that the advisors to cabinet, the advisors to the prime minister, they find that a little awkward and, a little inconvenient. So they've decided that they actually get to decide. That's my high level summary of the remarkable testimony today.
Well, there you have it, folks. Here's everything you need to know about what went on November 18th, 2022 during the Emergencies Act inquiry, which there's only 1 week left, and we're going to see the Liberal ministers, the Liberal cabinet, and CSIS testify this week, so that'll be extremely interesting. Definitely stay tuned for that. For Rebel News, this is William Diaz. If you want to follow our independent journalism here, straight from Canada's national capital in Ottawa, for the next few days only, it's almost over, go ahead and visit truckercommission.com.